What's going on, guys? I'm Jody. This is Inspire Woodcraft. Today I want to take a look at the difference between our finish nailers and brad nailers. I recently got an email from someone saying, hey, I'm new to this. Should I get a finish nailer? Should I get a brad nailer? What are your thoughts? What are your opinions? What are your recommendations? And I've already emailed that person back separately. Hey, Chuck. But I thought it was a good topic to make a video out of because there are some differences and there are some pros and there are actually some cons to having one over the other. And I want to take it a step further and go with the pros and cons possibly of getting a cordless system or going with a pneumatic system. Now, I don't normally say something like this, but I think it's important for this video. All the stuff that you see here is all stuff I've bought and paid for. It's stuff that I use all the time. It's stuff I can definitely recommend. In fact, if I couldn't recommend it, I probably wouldn't talk about it to begin with. But the reason I bring that up is because in this video, I'm going to be talking about certain things, and it's going to be related to how I have my tools and the things that I use my tools for. It's not necessarily all encompassing as far as, you know, tool brands and different types of nailers and stuff. There's a lot of stuff on the market. I just can't really speak for those things. But a lot of things I'm going to talk about are pretty equal across the board. Now, I want to start out with our finish nails. Finish nails typically come in a 15 or 16 gauge nail. Now, remember, when we talk about gauge, the bigger the number, the smaller the diameter. So a 23 gauge pin nailer is going to be a very small diameter nail, where a 15 gauge nail, finish nail, is going to be a much larger diameter nail. So you always have to kind of go opposite. Now, I've had both 15 and 16 gauge nailers in the past, and I think realistically, like in practical use, I've never done a job with a 16 gauge nail and then thought, oh, that thing's rickety, I should have used a 15 gauge nail. They're pretty darn close. But I will say, as far as my purchasing decision as to why I got both pneumatic and cordless 15 gauge angled nailers, is because the nails are more readily available. I can pick different manufacturers. There's just more selection. There's more sizes at local stores. Now, of course, when we jump online, we can find anything we want, but for this type of a thing, you want to just run down to the store and get it most of the time. And I find that there's a better selection of the 15 gauge angled nails. So that's what I have. Now, 15 gauge nail is going to be a little bit larger in diameter. It's going to have a little bit larger head. That means it's going to have a little bit better holding power. That also means we can get it in an electro galvanized, which is going to be better for exterior and interior applications. I like to use these for outdoor applications, like when I'm building a planter box or I'm making something out of, say, fence boards. Basically, anything that's going to live outside. And while electro galvanized nails aren't as good as dipped galvanized nails that you would do by hand, that's what we have available to us with pneumatic guns. This is going to make it so that things aren't going to rust nearly as easily when we use them on exterior applications. So if you've ever seen a fence and it has a whole bunch of lines coming down it, wherever they put a nail or a screw, those are rust trails. The screw or the nail goes into the board. There's no coating on it to protect it from weather. The nail rusts and it leaves a rust trail. So this electro galvanized is going to give us a little bit better protection against that in exterior applications. I like using finish nails because they have more structural integrity than a brad nail. I'm going to use these if I'm building any kind of a structural setup like a cabinet case. I'm also going to use them most likely attaching face frames to cabinets because they just have a better holding power. However, because of their larger diameter, head and nail, they also are more destructive when the head of the nail actually pierces the surface of the material that you're going into. That's going to be a pain in the butt later on when it comes time to sanding. Now, all things aren't necessarily equal. It depends on the type of wood that you're going into, but these can be a lot more destructive. And so when you go back to putty that hole and sand it down, you might have a little bit more work to take care of on that end. Now, to get away from that, that's where we would use a brad nail. A brad nail is going to be an 18 gauge nail. It's going to be much smaller in diameter. It's going to have a much smaller head. Now, that does mean it has less holding power, but because it is so much smaller in diameter, it means it is way less destructive, and we can use this for more fine detail stuff like decorative moldings or trims. It's also going to be better for when we want to go into thin stock, like say 1/4 inch or so, and we don't want to split the grain, where a finish nailer is probably probably going to end up splitting the grain on you at some point, if you're using solid wood, of course, and then you're gonna have a whole other set of issues that you're dealing with. Brad nail is definitely gonna be better for those more delicate operations. Brad nails also come in a shorter length, and I know this is 3/4 inch, but I think this gun goes from 5/8 to 2 1/8. I've never used a 2 1/8 inch long brad nail. That's pretty long, I think, for such a narrow diameter. But I do like brad nails for those shorter applications. I can't run a 3/4 inch nail in my 15 gauge finish nailer, so I would need a brad nailer in order to get that shorter size. The finish nails, in my experience, come anywhere from 1 inch to 2.5 inches. And before, when I told you, depending on the manufacturer and what you get, you're gonna have some different options, this is actually a pretty good point. This nailer is pneumatic. It happens to go from 1 inch to 2.5 inches. This one goes from 1.25 inches to 2.5 inches. So that's one of those things where if you know you have specific projects in mind that you want to do and you know you need a certain length nail, you may want to find one that'll do a 1 inch nail, because I can't run a 1 inch nail in this one. This one could let me down in a very specific application. So just be aware of that. I've never had any of them let me down. It's more of a matter of the fact that I should probably switch to a brad nailer instead of a finish nailer for certain jobs. So to recap, we have finish nailers. Finish nailers are going to be a bigger, thicker nail, typically a 15 gauge or a 16 gauge. Like I said, I find that the 15 gauge angled nails are more readily available. There's more types, more manufacturers, different prices, and I like having that availability local to me at a hardware store. They're also going to be a lot better when it comes to structural stuff, so cabinet carcasses, face frames, stuff like that, that might take a little bit of an abuse. I want a nail that's in there that's going to be more structural in that case, instead of being more flimsy like an 18 gauge nail. And while they do have really good holding power, they can be a lot more destructive for your finishing process, which means you're probably going to spend more time sanding and filling holes and whatnot down the road. It means those holes are going to be a little bit more visible as well. Switching over to a brad nailer is going to be a much smaller diameter hole. It's going to be way less destructive. It's going to be really good for those fine detail works like decorative moldings, and it's going to not have the holding power, of course, that the finish nailer has. So again, different things for different applications. That's why I can't really recommend one particular tool or one particular type of tool, because they're really used for different applications. You can get by using one or the other for some similar applications, but at the end of the day, they are two different tools for two different purposes. That's a quick overview on the difference between a finish nail and a brad nail. But now the issue is, if we're just starting this out, do we go with a cordless system or do we go with a pneumatic system? And I think there's some pros and cons to both. I know because I've experienced both of them. When we typically go to make a purchase, the first thing we look at is price. I think that's just kind of how most of us are wired. And when you do that, when you go to buy nailers, I can tell you right now, you're going to be completely put off by the price of cordless nailers. They just cost more than their pneumatic siblings. Siblings? We'll call them siblings. Case in point, I purchased all of these locally. This was $400 at the Home Depot. This is the nailer and the battery. This, I don't remember how much I paid for this, but I do know that I looked up the price for a DeWalt, so that it's the same manufacturer, pneumatic 15 gauge nailer, and this was $189, also at Home Depot, which means going to the same store, same manufacturer, same nailers. The only difference is this one is cordless and this one is pneumatic. This one is over half the price of this one. And so sticker shock is definitely a factor with this. In fact, I think this one was $400 and I believe the brad nailer was $300. That's a lot of money when you're first starting out, and it's a lot to invest in. But there's definitely some advantages to having this cordless system. There's so many times where I have a project where I just want to throw a couple nails in real quick and I want to be done with it. Now I could go over and find some hand nails and grab a hammer and stuff, but I don't want to do that. I want something that is quick and easy. And one of the beautiful things about pneumatic or cordless nailers is that you're not rocking things around as you're tapping and nailing and stuff. There's sometimes when I use nailers to act as a clamp. So I glue something up and then I go back through and I shoot a couple nails in it, and that's gonna hold it while the glue sets, and then I can keep moving on my project, as opposed to setting up clamps and everything. It's not always the case that I can do that, but when I can, I definitely take advantage of using a nailer of some sort to do that for me. And that also makes it so that I can hold pieces together myself and then shoot a nail in there real quick, as opposed to trying to hold all that stuff and then tap a nail in. It never really works out quite well. This is so nice to just have sitting on the shelf, always ready to go. Battery's charged, it's ready to go. I can just pick this up at any minute and use it. I don't have to run cords or hoses. I don't have to fire up the compressor. I don't have to drain the tanks later. The other thing with cordless is I happen to already be on DeWalt's battery system. So for me, it's sort of twofold. One, I can find the same tools that use the same batteries so that, you know, I can have the same chargers and stuff, but it also means that I don't necessarily have to get the tool with the battery. And some manufacturers will let you buy just the tool only without the battery. And so if you have enough batteries laying around already and you always have one spare, use that spare for your new tool, and that'll save you money on the purchase of the tool itself. So that's kind of nice to have that option. With the pneumatic stuff, you have to have a compressor, you have to have hoses in order to have these. However, you can buy an 18 gauge and a 15 gauge for the same price as this one. Again, you have to have the compressor, but you can also find kits. I think I found a kit for $229, and it was a brad nailer, hose, and a small compressor, all for $229. So if you're just starting out, that's really not a bad price for getting started. Now, I don't know the details on the brad nailer that came with it or anything. If I can find it again, I'll leave a link for it or something so you guys can look at it if you need to. But like I said, if money is tight, pneumatic's probably going to be the way to go. Now, I tried to keep this video short and sweet, so that means I probably glazed over something. If you have anything to add, make sure you leave a comment so the rest of us can learn from that. Other than that, I think that's all I got for you guys. Thanks so much for watching this video. As always, we'll see you guys in the next one.